going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with another walleye jig today. The jig I'm tying today, I mean, it's not just for walleye. I mean, you could easily tie this or fish this for big crappie, even big perch and stuff like that. So it's not like it's some massive bait where you're only going to be fishing big predator fish like that. I'm going to be using a rabbit zonker today, and it's a little bit tricky on these jig hooks with these zonker strips, trying to get them put on really well. So this is going to have a zonker strip really on the top, and it's going to have a rabbit zonker little dubbing loop right by the bead to kind of build up some shoulders by the head. I'm going to put eyes on it. I'm in that habit of just putting eyes on it. The first thing I'm going to do, it's kind of weird. So this build is a little bit weird. I've had a couple pictures of these zonker strip flies, and I've just been messing around with a bunch of different stuff trying to get it in the jig form. And so I want this bait to have a little flash. So I'm going to put down, this is actually polar chenille in medium, and you can see I've just kind of cut it because I don't have a ton of small chenille, and I didn't want to wait 5 days for some small chenille to get here. So I've just been cutting it, and I'll probably end up cutting it down a little bit more. I don't want a ton of this chenille to build up, and I really don't want a ton sticking out the back of my bait. So I ended up trimming it, and if I need to trim it more, I will. So this is red UTC 140. The reason I'm using 140, I mean, I prefer 70 if I can, just because I tend to over wrap, but I'm doing a little dubbing loop on this, and so I wanted to make sure that I'm going to have some strong enough thread that I'm not worried about breaking. So I'm just going to kind of get this chenille all the way up, not quite to where my bead is, and once you get that started, it usually, I'm not even really going to do touching wraps. I'm going to kind of separate them just a little bit because I don't want this to build up too much. And you can see how much I missed when I trimmed this. And so I'm going to end up trimming off all this really long stuff, and I didn't even trim enough there. So that should be good. Maybe one more. Then I'll get that tied off with a couple tight wraps. Just get that tied down. Then I'll trim off what I don't use. You use about 3 inches or so of that. I just like to have a little bit extra. It's easier to wrap. So I'm just gonna really just come in here right now, and I'm just gonna trim off a bunch of this really long stuff. And I really want to be intentional about trimming the stuff that my zonker strip is gonna rest on. So I'm just going to kind of come in here. I've got these old loon razor scissors that I just keep on in my little caddy, and I just use these for synthetic stuff, but that's just meant to add a little bit of flash. The zonker strip I'm using, I mean, you could use like a bling zonker strip, and that should be plenty of flash, but I didn't have a bling zonker strip in the color I wanted to use. I've been messing around with some colors, and I really like this pattern. So I've got this fulling mill rabbit zonker, and it says olive grizzly black barred. So I've got like a 2.5 inch zonker strip here, and I'm going to flip my jig because this is going to ride eye up. So I'm just going to put this right behind my bead, and I got to watch out for my hook point. It's not really going to be detrimental if it pokes it a little, but I'm going to get that tied in nice and tight right behind my bead, and I'm going to end up wrapping back. And you can always, if you really want, you could try and trim off some more of that hide, but I'm not worried about this thread building up because I've got plenty of room to mess around with that. So I'm just going to kind of leave this sitting just like this. I'm going to end up poking this hide through my hook, but I'm just not going to do that quite yet. I want to get my other rabbit down before I do that. I'm going to do it before my eyes though, because it takes some pressure to kind of get that on there. So I'll just kind of get a little dubbing loop ready. I just have a tiny little dubbing loop that I'm going to do. The dubbing loop just adds a nice body or head to this bait. So I've got same rabbit, probably, I don't know, this is maybe 2 inches. So I'm just going to put that in there. And I just don't want this too long. So I'm going to be kind of conscious about how much rabbit is going to be sticking out. I just don't want it too long. So I'll kind of push that up. And then I'm going to trim as much of this stuff off as I can, just to avoid too much bulk up by my head. I'll just get that trimmed off really close, just don't cut your thread. So I've got my dubbing loop ready to go. This might be more than I'm going to use. I would rather have a little bit that I throw away than get all of it on there and wish I had more. I really don't have a ton of room right here. I'm just going to really tightly pack this in, and I'm going to wrap all the way up to my bead, and then I'll end up wrapping back a little bit for my eyes. I just want these to be nice and tight on there. And I should have probably trimmed a little bit more on the other side. I just don't want too much of that really thick stuff at the base of the hair. But that also helps it add some of that body to it. I don't want to get any of my thread wrapped over my materials. Just going to keep preening this back. Tight wraps. Get all the way up there. And again, I'll end up pushing a lot of this back. Maybe I will end up using all this. Again, I just don't want to wrap over my stuff. So I'll get that. I'll kind of just end right here. I might have a little bit extra, but that's alright. So I'll just get that tied off with a couple tight wraps. Try not to hit too much of my stuff. I'm just going to push my thread against my bead when I do this, just so I know that when I'm wrapping, I'm not wrapping over too much of that stuff. And 3 wraps should be pretty good to trim this off. Just get my scissors, come real close right there. Don't trim too much of your stuff off. Get that out of the way. And then I'm just going to push all this back. Watch your hook point. I'm just going to push all that back and just give it a bunch of good wraps right there and make sure that everything's looking spick-span. So I'm going to pinch all of this and I'm going to bring my thread back just to build a little bit of an area to put down my eyes. And it's not going to affect really that rabbit too much, just pushing it back. And if you want to get really picky, you can take a lighter and kind of burn off some of those hairs that are being really picky. I'm just going to make sure I've got all of my green covered. Again, you don't have to. This is just me being a little bit kooky. So that should be enough room for my eyes. So I'm going to get whip finished off, and then before I put my eyes down, I'm going to do a few wraps here just to kind of build up a little bit more thread. Then I can just get this off. So to get this hide pushed through, I'm going to take this out of my vise, and what I'm going to do, this might be a little bit tricky to see in the camera. I'll try and give you the better side if there is one. I'm going to pull this tight and kind of see where on the hide it lines up right with the bend of my hook, and that's where I'm going to end up pushing this. Now it ends up getting pushed down a little bit from that chenille and stuff like that, but this is a really wide gap hook, and so I'm not worried about that at all. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to put that tight, and I can kind of see where that would be. And I'm just, to my best ability, this is a really easy way to get a hook in your thumb So just be really careful, because this hide is actually a lot tougher than you'd think. And then I'll just keep pushing, 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 and then once it gets past the barb, then it's really, it just slides right on. And so once you have that kind of where you want it, that hide, you can always just take that back out if you don't like where it's sitting, and you can just change it. I mean, that hide, it's not gonna like rip on you like a lot of materials would if you try to take it out and put them back in. So once you've got that kind of where you want it, it doesn't have to be perfect, because once this stuff is wet anyway, it all mats down. So I've got here some 5mm eyes in earth color, and I'm just gonna put them on, but I'm gonna put them really high up when I put these on, that they're gonna sit close, higher up on my jig than further down. The couple that I've made, I just was getting a little picky about where my eyes were sitting. So I'm gonna push these right on to my hide just a little bit higher than I normally would. Set these, and I can just make sure that it's just gonna stick right to that hide. It's not gonna go really anywhere, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want them sitting nice and high up there. Then I'll put that second one in, and then you just gotta sit and let them dry. These earth eyes are nice and green, and it kind of perfectly matches this olive. I'll get this second one pushed on there. Make sure that they're going to be at least even-ish. Get that pushed in, and just make sure they're where you want them. You can put these anywhere you want. You don't have to put any on at all. I'm going to let that set, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of UV resin on those eyes. So these eyes have dried up a little bit, so I'm just going to grab some medium viscosity UV res, and I'm going to just put, I've got just a little hair on there, I'm just going to put a little bit on here. I'm going to be really careful not to get any, or at least the least amount I can, on to this fur. It's really just to add an even head to this bait, and I'm just gonna let that sit, and I'll cure it before. If I flip this around, sometimes it'll run a little bit, and I just don't want that, so I'm just gonna cure that just for a second, so then I can get this side without worrying about it dripping down, because this medium isn't, you know, it's not bone dry. Bone dry is just water thin, but it will run a little bit on you. So I'm just gonna cure that, and we should be good to go. So this is a little bit less than 3 inches. I'm really excited to use these. I'm hoping that this rabbit is gonna be a nice flimsy tail. Junior's Fishing Company. Like and subscribe. Drop comments below, stuff you wanna see. It's ice fishing season, so I'll be getting out there as much as I can. Hopefully still getting at least one video a week. I might miss a couple weeks here on some trips and stuff like that, but we'll see you on the next one.